Hey everybody, welcome back to the Hit Me With Your Best Pint podcast. My name is Jake Turner, your host. This week, Tom from Brighten Brewing Company made his way to Mays Valley to talk to me about a few different beers that he brought with him. They were all really delicious beers. There's a bit of a hiccup late in the episode as we didn't realize that Spotify cuts the episode off at an hour of recording, so we had to kind of reset and go back and re-record the last bit of our segment. So hold tight on that. This one's a little bit longer than the previous episodes have been, but I think you'll all enjoy it. Cheers. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Hit Me With Your Best Pint podcast. Today I'm joined by Tom Robbins from Brighten Brewing Company. Tom, it's good to see you.
It's good to see you as well, Jake.
Thanks for making the trek down to Mays Valley here so we could talk some of your beer.
Hey, I'm always down for a little trip. Field trips.
Excellent. Yeah, field trips are good a lot of the time. Any excuse to get out of the brewery.
You got it.
So, you're up at Brighten Brewing Company in Copley. You want to give us kind of a little bit of a location right where that's at?
Yeah, so Copley is a small little township on the far west side of Summit County. Pretty much borders Norton, Wadsworth, Bath, and West Akron. Fairlawn also. So we're kind of in the cut a little bit, but we're really not that far out of the way. Pretty easy to get to. We got 3 major highways right around us and the triangle in the middle, and a couple major roads, Cleveland-Massillon Road and Copley Road. We're just north of Copley Circle on Cleveland-Massillon Road.
Yeah. You guys have been in business for, what, right around 2.5 years?
Yeah, just over. It'll be 3 years, June 23rd. So that's coming up.
Yeah, not too far away.
Very quickly.
And I know you started out, well, I'm not sure exactly where you started. I met you when you were still at Loggerheads, brewing there. You said you had some time at Thirsty Dog as well?
Yeah, so started at Thirsty Dog. I was pretty young, just about 22. I was there for just under 4 years. So basically cut my teeth there. I would take all my home brews down there, and they had an opening for a brewer's position, and I saw the opportunity, so I took it.
Yeah.
With how much fun I was having home brewing, it definitely translated into professional brewing.
Yeah. I wonder how many guys got their start at Thirsty Dog. I know there's a handful in the area that I know of for sure.
There's quite a few. Yeah. And a lot of them, they've all left to go kind of do their own thing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I definitely enjoyed it. That was, I was one of few brewers out of there too that had, I guess the luck or whatnot, time to spend with Tim Rastetter, and learn, a quite extensive amount of beer through that guy.
Yeah.
If you don't know who Tim Rastetter is, he's a fucking legend.
Yeah, for sure. What got you into brewing beer? Was you start as a home brewer, or?
Yeah, so starting as a home brewer, pretty much. The building that Thirsty Dog is in is owned by a business that I used to work for, which is a pipe fitting company.
Gotcha.
So out of high school, I was just a laborer, truck driver for that pipe fitting company for probably close to 3.5 years. During like the last 18 months of working for that pipe fitting company, me and a buddy of mine from grade school did all the demolition down in the basement where Thirsty Dog is.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I got to know Tim, who was the brewmaster at that time, and John Nayway. And then turns out John Nayway and my family know each other. They go back way long ago. So it's kind of a weird circle of getting to know Nayway. He'd already known my grandparents and whatnot. And after that 18 months or so of demolition, I started home brewing. During that period, I bought books, was reading up on books before I did anything. Tim actually gave me some old homebrew equipment, kind of helped me get into all grain a little quicker. And then we just take all my beers down there for probably about a year before they offered me a job.
Yeah.
And I was about to go into the union as a union pipe fitter, going as an apprentice, and kind of glad I didn't. I'm sure my body would be just as fucked up. But
precisely. Yeah.
But I think the pipe fitting company pipe fitting business would not have brought me as many experiences as craft brewing heads. One, meeting Jake.
Yeah.
Jake, we met back when I was at Loggerheads. I don't know about
Let's say we went back. We're back a little while there, probably
I was
at least
there
8-9 years ago.
Yeah, I was there almost 8 years, and God, I don't remember if we met when in my employment there we met, but
I know when we met. So I think the first time I met you was up at the Blues and Brews Fest.
that would probably be right.
At Lock 3. And that was, I remember it was funny because that was, I can't remember, it was the first year that the brewery was open here. It likely was. I think it was the second year we were in operation, because I don't think I did the Blues and Brews the first year we were here, because we didn't officially open the brewery till Labor Day of 14, so that would have been after Blues and Brews had taken place. But I think it was that second year. You were probably the first person to ever tell me that the first person, I guess not the first person, but the first person, another professional brewer, or the first person in the brewing industry that told me my beer was decent. It was one of those things where like, hey man, you're making like pretty good beer. And I was like, oh, this is great. Tom thinks I'm making good beer. Like, I've enjoyed Loggerheads beers to that point. Like, I remember before I was in the brewing industry and just a craft beer enthusiast, drinking, Loggerhead beers that I was buying at the grocery store, because, there wasn't a ton of craft beer on the shelf at that point in time. And so it's like, oh, this place is right out of Medina. Let me see what they're making, and drinking it and be like, oh, this is really nice stuff. And then I think my dad and I were riding motorcycles, and so we were trying to find a place to go out to one day. Like, hey, let's take a long motorcycle ride. It's a nice day. I was like, hey, let's ride out to Loggerheads. I know they got a restaurant and stuff out there, so we rode our bikes out to Medina and had a couple of beers and some barbecue sandwiches and had a good old time, and then met you a couple of years later. After I was in the industry. What kind of brewery do you guys see yourself as? You got a lot of breweries that are like, hey, we're making, the hype boys, super juicy stuff. You got guys, that do beer flavored beer still, as Sean from Acronym put it last week when I talked to him. I feel like I fit into that camp. I feel like maybe you fit into that camp in a lot of ways.
I think I probably definitely fit into that camp. You brought up Sean. I think Sean and I have a very similar draft list at times, similar philosophy about beer in general. You probably share the same things as well, Jake. I learned from Tim Rassetter. He's a classic brewer. At that time, he was like, I hate American hops.
How the tables have turned, probably.
Tables have definitely turned. He always loved his classic noble hops. That was his thing. He definitely loved his English hops, but his noble hops is what he really, really appreciated. And I think they're underappreciated too. You get some great flavors out of them noble hops. I mean, get a nice light lager and you do a nice finishing addition, some Tettnang, some Herzbrucker, or
you get that
Sterling,
pop of
Crystal.
floral.
Oh God, it's delightful.
Just wonderful nose. The kind of classic thing you always think of, beer, I guess, in your mind having. And that's, I love those hops. It's, I'm getting ready to brew a Helles next week, the first Helles I've made. And that's not a super hop forward beer by any stretch of the imagination. That's definitely a malt forward style. However, I'm excited to throw a bunch of, Holler Tower Middle Fruit into this beer, and just really, that's the kind of stuff I, just that like simple, kind of malt bill, like nothing getting in the way of anything else, just that balance and synergy.
It's a beautiful thing that comes out of simplicity on that end.
It's almost as if the people that have been classically been making beer for centuries and centuries might know a little something.
Yes, they were definitely on to something.
have taken it to that level.
Yeah, and I don't want to confuse the listeners with the word simplicity in those beers. There's still a lot of complexity into producing those beers. But just the simplicity and the classic tried and true ingredients that haven't changed, and there's a lot of places that haven't changed a thing either, and they're still making fantastic beers, lagers.
Yeah, and I love, those styles that are like, yeah, they're simple in ingredients, but when you're selecting the best ingredients you can find, and you're making a beer that's ultimately very drinkable, but it just has that correct level of everything, like that perfect balance
Yep.
of malt and hops to whatever end you're looking for, whether it's extreme refreshment or you're looking for you know that heavier malt bill, or barrel character or whatever. Like being able to have that beer, pick out something that is a little more complex on flavor or interesting,
Mm-hmm.
but with a more streamlined process. I guess that's what's more fun to me.
Yeah.
Are those either those very like fermentation driven beers?
Yes, I was just gonna make a comment on fermentation. Yeah, following the fermentation schedule and keeping that in line with what you are intended to get in your end result was a nice, clean, crisp beer.
That's speaking of sort of sometimes the simplicity of ingredients and fermentation driven beers. What we have in our glass today, if you want to talk about what we're having right now, well, the first beer we're going to talk about right now.
So this was a beer, we have not put it out yet. It's in keg, sitting in the cooler, waiting for an open handle.
I feel privileged that I'm getting to be one of the first, I guess.
So this is actually, so it's a Belgian double, and I've only done 2 batches of it, this being the first batch of the Belgian double that we've done here at Brighten Brewing, called Monastic Snack. And I got a red wine barrel from Wolf Creek Winery, it's just right up the road from us. They were going to get rid of that barrel, and I was like, well, hell, I'll take it. I mean, I'll embrace whatever weird may be in there.
Sure.
Nothing too weird. Didn't come out funky at all. Might
Yeah,
have a touch of acidity, touch of sourness, but
that's a lot of my concern a lot of the time with doing things in like a red wine barrel or any wine barrel is, am I rolling the dice on how much Brett or funk I might be getting out of this barrel if I do that? And this, I mean, to me, I mean, there's that kind of just whiny hint of tartness.
Yeah, and it comes off touch like of acetaldehyde, but I think it's more of the wine character in the barrel that's bringing that out.
Yeah, that's what I'm picking. I'm not picking up a lot of that like classic kind of like green apple character that you can get sometime from acetaldehyde. This is, for sure, the barrel character I get on this is one of, you get that red wine,
oak,
kind of tannic and slightly tart. And then there's that bit of like charred oak on it, which is really nice.
Yeah.
And it works beautifully with, a Belgian double, base beer in there. It's one of those complementary characteristics.
Absolutely.
So
this was in there for close to 2 years, and it was one I was like, I really just want to let this thing sit, let whatever's in that barrel do its work on that beer, and I think it turned out fantastic. This is the first time I've ever done in my career a wine barrel aged beer.
Yeah.
I do like the 18 to 24 month range of aging, whether it be in a bourbon barrel.
Sure.
Well, it's mostly what my experience is doing bourbon barrels. But this turned out really, really interesting and very unique. I mean, you still get some malt sweetness, but it still finishes dry. That's a lot of like tannics and whatnot that you were talking about.
Yeah.
And I get a lot of cranberry with cherry. So when I first moved this out of the barrel, and I just did one barrel, pumped it into the bright tank, I thought I was going to have to dump it because it was just not tasting right. After 2 months of being cold, once it developed carbonation, I was like, okay, I'm not going to dump it. I had an open bright tank. I didn't need that bright tank anyhow. And I was like, I couldn't get over if I was going to have to dump it or not. Glad I didn't. Glad I gave it some more time.
Yeah.
Which also just shows like giving beer time.
Yeah, sometimes time is really all it needs because there can be some harsh edges around some beers.
Yep.
And, if you give it a little bit of time for some of that to fall out or, let the...
Cold conditioning makes a huge difference.
Yeah,
whether that beer's been sitting around for 2 years or not.
Right. Yeah.
And that's my opinion, my experiences too.
Yeah, and that's, I don't think people appreciate the amount of time a lot of barrel aged beers can take. And that's, I know some places that do shorter barrel aged times, and I'm always like, well, yes, there is some barrel character in it, but it's not sort of that rounded, more developed character that you would really seek.
And it's not always just the barrel. There's also all the other things. There's like the micro oxygenation coming into play.
Well, and temperature and wherever you're doing those barrels, because a lot of times, and I find out here, especially through the winter time, and that's typically when I start filling barrels, or usually during our slow months, that's when I get the barrel aged stuff we're doing going. And man, for those first, 4 to 6 months, there's almost nothing picked up a lot of the time if it's cold out here, because you need those warmer temperatures to sort of get that beer to move in and out of the wood and pick up, all that wonderful character you're after. And so, especially if you're getting some barrels that are a little bit drier, that, might have been sitting there a little more than they should have before they were filled.
Yeah.
It takes a while to resaturate that wood, get it, get the moisture content appropriate, and then actually have the beer working in and out of that wood and developing that character can take a good bit of time. And that's, you have to know your barrels. You have to be tasting, every month or two to see where it's at.
Yeah.
And that can take a lot of time. And
it can.
A lot of people don't appreciate,
nor do they know if that's the right thing to do or not.
Yeah, and it's, I just said, I see brewers occasionally, they'll have a beer in a barrel for only a couple of months or whatever, pull it, and you're like, man, that, I see what you were trying to go for here, but it's not quite where maybe it could have been if you let it sit longer. And it's where barrel aging, you really need some patience and, understand that, hey, if I'm tucking this away in a barrel, like it could be there for at least a year.
Yeah,
and a lot of times more. Yeah.
And that's where I like and I think that's something I picked up from, way long ago, going down to Ohio Brew Weeks. This was probably my time at Loggerheads. I started going down to a brew week during my employment at Thirsty Dog, which I still had buddies in college there. So that worked out really well.
Yeah, you got a place to stay, couch to crash on.
Yeah, right at the end of Congress or Court Street on Congress, and could just walk to the event the next day. But they had air conditioning for my dog down there. But that was something I picked up from Brad Clark, who was formerly at Jackie O's, their head dude there. He was like 18, 20, 24 months. He's like, that's the way to fucking do it.
Yeah.
It's like, you can blend shit elsewhere if, younger barrels if needed. But he's like, the majority of my stuff is already aged for 18, 20, 24 months. And he's like, that's where you're going to get the best amount of barrel character. And I totally agree with that.
Yeah. And that's one of the other great things about having an opportunity to talk to other brewers is, especially if there are brewers that you admire or you think are turning out really great beer, is getting an opportunity to talk to those people and be like, hey, what are you doing with this? And, what's your process on this like? And I think that's kind of the great thing about this industry is I understand that, even if I tell you hey, this is my process, kind of, the overall what I'm doing here.
Yeah.
You're going to have your own ideas, or you're going to have your own processes or equipment or whatever. And so even if I, hand you the book on what it is I'm doing, it's never going to necessarily be the same with how you're doing it somewhere else or whatever.
Yeah, it all depends on what's at your fingertips in terms of, equipment, space, time. And then also your interpretation of it. I mean, I know you and I have probably talked to plenty of people that we're probably saying the same thing, but they just had a completely different way of saying it.
Sure.
A lot of that comes with experience. A lot of that comes with back and forth banter between brewers and having conversations and open conversations. And, to your point, I don't think there's fucking any other industry in this world that you can both be competitors to a degree and really good friends and bounce information back and forth to help each other out.
Yeah, and I think that a level
Share
of
resources.
collaboration doesn't necessarily exist even in this industry in a lot of places.
Mhm.
You know, we have kind of the good fortune in this state of having a Brewers Guild that sort of encourages that sort of collaboration and information sharing,
Yeah.
where we're all kind of thinking to ourselves, you know, and I wish, you know, a lot of states did this where it was, you know, hey, you know, our goal, you know, or our common benefit maybe is, hey, if we share information with each other and we're open about kind of what we're doing to make the best beer we can, and we encourage the other breweries that exist here in the state to do the same, then that makes us a destination for great beer, and people will travel for it.
Yep.
And on top of that, you know, the old rising tide lifts all boats sort of
Yep.
philosophy.
Yep.
Where you're like, hey, if we're collaborative and we can talk openly about, you know, successes and problems and all that kind of stuff and help each other navigate what we're doing, then we're going to be that leg up on other places where you can look to Ohio and say, hey, Ohio's making not only some of the best beer in the country, but some of the best beer in the world. And, you know, go that end. And that's, you know, traveling to other states occasionally and stuff. You know, I'll have beer in other places where I'm just like, how is it that this made its way onto a grocery store shelf?
Yeah.
You know, where I look at a grocery store
And it's
there,
only
there
3
have been
weeks
times
old.
where I've gone to stores in other states and like seen cans leaking on the shelf or gotten stuff that I was just like, what happened here and who told them this was okay to
who was allowing this
sell
to, go
to
on?
human beings for consumption?
Yeah.
So it's, you know, we're kind of, I guess, maybe a little bit spoiled on that end where we have that access to other people. Especially, it was crucial probably for you. I mean, obviously for you and I at the same time, where, you know, we got into this when there wasn't a ton of breweries in the state. You know, I think when we started out here, there was like 60 couple of breweries in the whole state. Now we're over 400.
I remember at Thirsty Dog, we were brewery number like 24 in Ohio.
And that's wild.
And that's also, you know, we were talking before this about events and how they've changed and how they're not the same anymore. And like, I don't care what lens you look at it through, they are not the same.
Yeah.
And, you know, I like yourself. I mean, I've been going to these events since I was fucking 22 in 2008. They were fun then.
Yeah.
There was only so many breweries. People were excited to come out there.
Yeah.
People traveled for it. They were excited to see the difference, the growth. I mean, that was also the time when people were like, how many IBUs can we pack in a beer?
Yeah.
But there were still people brewing like, you know, really good Baltic porters, really good just classic porters.
Yeah.
Really good pale ales. You know, there's a lot of beer styles that just don't get as much recognition that they should. And a lot of that is
that's the point of the podcast, Tom.
Exactly the point of this podcast.
That's what we're doing here. We want to bring it back full circle.
And, you know, some of it, you know, I'm not the trendy brewer like we've talked about just a little bit ago.
Yeah, I think everyone.
And there's good ways to do things and bad ways to do things. There's a right time and a wrong time.
Yeah.
I just can't take these pastry stouts anymore. That's, you know, I can get behind a hazy beer, you know, sometimes fruited, but generally going to stray away from anything fruited. You know, going into, you know, American hops, how Tim hated those. Like, it is kind of interesting to see a whole another sector of this industry just explode with different varieties and options. Sometimes for me, it's a little overwhelming. It's like, what new hop just came out? Like,
yeah, it's tough because
like,
the thing is, like, every group of growers, you know, they've always got new varietals coming out, and it really has kind of hit that point where it's almost impossible to keep up with everything that everybody's bringing out. And I struggle with that too, because it's like I have those classic sort of hop varietals that I love to use throughout my portfolio. I mean, as far as craft beer goes, you know, I think everybody sort of our burgeoning interest in that at that time, we're enamored with things like Cascade,
Yeah.
and which was a giant thing, Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, and I know most brewers are still in love with that beer.
Forever. That will be a favorite beer of mine.
Yeah, that's when I don't have my own stuff at home, what's in my fridge is Sierra Nevada Pale Ale.
Yeah.
And that's always, something I'm going to have. And it's, one of those beers that was so instrumental because it could show you what just one portion of that beer could do, just one ingredient in that beer, and kind of how it could change your perception of what beer could be.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of my moment with it was, I remember drinking Sierra Nevada Pale Ale for the first time and just being like, holy smokes, like,
I feel like I lost my virginity.
This is, beer virginity is like, this is wonderful. Like, the character that I'm getting out of this is unbelievable. And at that point in time, everybody was still drinking, American light lager, and it was all completely uninteresting and at the most part kind of disgusting.
Yes.
And so having, Sierra Nevada Pale Ale and experiencing just like the wonders of something like a whole cone hopped Cascade Pale Ale, and just the nuance and the flavor and just how not only balanced it was, but that you definitely got a lot of hop character out of it.
Yep.
Was astronomical. And that's, we've kind of moved from that point to what can we make that we can just call beer?
Yeah.
And, I have trouble with that because that's not the type of thing, like, I still, in my mind, I'm like, I'm making beer that tastes like beer.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a, spectrum of flavor just involved in that.
Yeah.
And now I'm like, people are like, it feels like a lot of the time it's like, what can I make that tastes like a daiquiri that I can call beer?
Yeah. No, that's
to try to bring as many people into the fold as I can.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's a function of, people wanting to be included in like the craft beer movement.
Yeah.
Whereas like, well, I want to drink a craft beer, but I don't like the flavor of hops.
Yes. Or
I don't like, something that is a little more bitter and, tastes like a loaf of bread with. I gotta say, and I think a lot of people are like, I want to go to a craft brewery, but I don't want to drink a beer necessarily.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know.
They're trying to spread across too many flavors, too many, palettes to fit into one glass. And
I don't want to sound like old man yells at cloud, because that's kind of how it feels a lot of the time.
It does.
But at the same time, it's like, there are many other beverage categories that you could get exactly the flavor you're looking for if that's what you're after. That doesn't necessarily need to be a beer.
Yeah, you don't got to fuck with mine.
Beer doesn't have to be everything.
No, it doesn't.
Beer can just be beer.
Yes.
And that's the way I feel about it.
In that statement, it is everything.
Yeah.
At least that's how I feel about it.
Yeah. We're going to finish these guys up, and we'll move into, and I'm excited to try the barrel-aged barley wine you brought. Is this bourbon barrels?
This is bourbon barreled. So again, just one barrel. It was a fairly dry barrel. It was also one of those weird barrels that was upright.
So it had the bung on the head.
On the head, which I didn't like, so I couldn't put it on a rack. So I filled that thing on the brewery floor because I didn't have a hose long enough to reach 15 feet the other way. So it was off the brewery floor. Rolling that thing was so goddamn sketchy. I thought a few times I was losing a toe.
That's how I feel about stacking barrel racks, is how sketchy it is.
Yeah, so I just rolled it off to the side. It was like that thing didn't move for almost 2 years. So these two were filled real close around the same time.
Yeah.
Maybe just a couple months apart. I don't know which one was first.
Yeah. I kind of forgot to ask pertinent, so well, I guess, What was the name of the wine barrel aged monastic snack? You got over that 7% ABV.
Mm-hmm. So monastic snack, Belgian beer is brewed by monks most of the time. During their times of fasting, beer was a snack.
Right. Yeah, you had all the Belgian abbeys.
Yeah.
Do you have a preferred Belgian yeast you like to use in these beers?
This batch, the first batch of monastic snack, which went into the barrel, I used whatever it was 2737 or 30, Trappist High Gravity white yeast.
Okay. Yeah.
Which I do prefer that, and I've used a couple other of the Belgian strains. I can't think of the numbers off the top of my head.
Yeah.
The second batch, actually, I didn't have time to propagate yeast or anything, so I just went on ahead and tried, for sake of trying, the Apex Dry Abbey yeast.
Yeah.
Didn't like it as much.
Yeah.
And I don't really know the fermentation, temperature, kinetics. I know what I can do with that white yeast.
Sure. Yeah.
I know that thing can get up warm.
Yeah.
I know I can pitch it high and let it kind of free rise and get everything I want out of it. Whereas the Apex, the temp range was fairly small for what I'm familiar with, and probably you are too,
especially for
the
Belgian
realm of Belgian beers.
Yeah.
And I kind of fell in love with Belgian beers when I was getting introduced to craft beers.
Yeah.
There was your Boston Lager, okay.
Right.
Guinness.
Sure.
Sam Smith's, fuck yes.
Yeah, I remember all the Sam Smiths.
Yep. And then, I'm trying to think of some others.
Sam Smith's Oatmeal Stout.
Yes.
Classic.
That's a quintessential oatmeal stout, just like Sierra Nevada Pale Ale is a quintessential pale ale. So I fell in love with Belgian beers, just not even really knowing all the unique nuances about what makes Belgian beers, so complex and interesting, especially when you just go right on the other side of their border to Germany, and you got Germany that's just strict and rigid.
Yeah, everything's
still making
clean,
fantastic beers,
yeah.
But I mean the list of ingredients or ammunition that the Belgians use and how they produce beer and the way they approach it was just. I thought it was beautiful, and it really captured me, and I still really think it's beautiful.
Yeah, and it took me a little bit of time to get into Belgian beers. Said I was coming from, living in army barracks and drinking light lagers and stuff, to moving on to Sierra Nevada Pale Ale and getting used to those hoppier West Coast beers.
Yeah.
And then a couple of years later, I started getting more into the Belgian ales and really gaining an appreciation for that, really fermentation-driven styles of beer between, wits and doubles and triples and quads and
and that's why I do a Belgian wit. I don't do a Hefeweizen. I don't do the German wheat beers.
Yeah.
Although I've been thinking about brewing one, but they're not my favorite. If I'm looking at it between a Belgian wit or a Hefeweizen, I'm going Belgian wit.
Yeah. And that's I think there's a.
Unless the option is Blue Moon, then I'm going.
Right, then you're going to get the German Hefe.
Yeah, I'm going the Weizen.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to crack this guy open and take a little sample here.
Yep. This one, I think, is one of the best barrel-aged beers I've ever done. So these are all, some of them were just canned fresh. Last they were canned was maybe 10 days ago. Some of the others.
Yeah, I can already tell just looking at it that it's going to be right up my alley.
Yeah, I think you'll really appreciate this. And I do have the unbarrel-aged barley wine here, which might not be bad to have that right after, just for a comparison.
Just for a little baseline of where it started and where it went.
Different beer, unrecognizable.
Really?
In all the good ways. I mean, not in a bad way at all.
That aroma, this brings, the aroma itself, just smelling it before I even taste it, kind of gives me a bit of a reminder of things like, Brooklyn's Monster Ale from back in the day. It's that was the other beer I moved on to after West Coast IPAs. I started really chasing barley wine in the winter months because of just that giant, everything about it is big. It's, big hops, big malts,
Mhm.
just, in your face. There's no avoiding what's happening in the glass.
Yep.
But it's, if you're, infatuated with those ingredients and just like having a big, strong beverage.
Everything just elevated. But this turned out really nice. It was a dry barrel. I can't recall.
It's really good.
It might have been called I think the tag on the side of it. I don't know what distillery it came from. And I actually drove out this way, out east, to get it. And I got 2 barrels at the time. The one barrel was just kind of a little mangled. So I was like, I'm not even fucking around with this.
Yeah.
So this is one I decided to keep and fill. And I drove out east somewhere near just past Warren or so. I can't quite remember exactly where, but barrels were cheap. But it was at some like furniture making company, and it was in this weird warehouse, one bay, and this dude just had stacks and stacks of barrels behind him, and just barrels taken apart, and he was making furniture, and he's like, "Yeah, these are 2 that just came in. They're fresh. They're both
some
dry
mystery barrels for you.
Yeah,
hanging out in one shop."
This one was actually wet, but I didn't fill it right away, so it did dry up.
Gotcha.
It leaked a little bit when I filled it. Not much. It sealed up by the next day, or even probably by the end of that day. But it was dry, smelled good. But this, I think it was called a wheat bourbon, is what the tag said. So it had to have come from a distillery that
was making wheated bourbon.
Contract distills, and it dumps off to some other to then brand it.
Right, like 1792 or something.
Yeah.
But so this is 10-7, and drinking it, taking that sip, it's not hot at all when you drink it.
No,
but you get that like slight warming as it moves past your palate and like it's into your stomach. Like you start to get that little bit of warmth. The alcohol is there, but it is not at all like taking a sip and getting a hot, fusel alcohol.
And I think 2 things contribute to that. Is 1, it was dry. And then 2, it sat for 2 years in that barrel.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that just really helps mellow things out, pull out way more character, gives that beer time to mellow out. Some things leave, some things come.
Yeah.
But color darkened up, but I get a lot of like a pecan, chocolate, some raisin.
I'd say like chocolate covered raisin was one of the first things that came to me, like having that sip. Just you get that kind of like dried fruit character, and then that kind of gives way to a little bit of the roast that's in there, a little bit of the barrel character. Yeah, and it's just
So I think you'll be shocked to try the original barley wine, which has still been aged for a couple years, just in a keg.
Yeah, I can't wait to give that a try too, just for a comparison.
It's funny, we did that beer with collaboration with Cornerstone, and they didn't really take any, so we just sold it all through our spot. And we put it on, take it off, put it on, take it off. So it was almost just filling in gaps as a placeholder. Sure. And it's surprising, like the further that. And this kind of goes into probably your whole segment of your podcast, is the further we get away from like classic styles in our industry and also the market, really, nobody knows what the fuck a barley wine is.
Yeah, and there's always
nobody.
I always laugh because there was a guy, like, I don't know if you've ever been on like Reddit.
There's a little bit, but me, I'm not.
Brewery subreddit, obviously. And there was a guy in there for a little while who was the barley wine heckler, was his username. And so he was a quote unquote barley wine enthusiast. And so he would get in and just like shit on everything that wasn't a barley wine. Yeah. Like in the brewery subreddit. And I loved it because I was like, I love a good barley wine. Yes. And so it's like one of those styles where it's like, if you're in the know and you've been around, craft brewing, and like barley wines were a big deal about 10 years ago.
They were.
And
because that was a beer you could push limits on.
You could really
people realized where their ceiling was
Yeah.
while still trying to keep it within the beer realm.
And I think this was still around the time that like it was all about the IBU chase for a while.
And you
where
can
it's like,
pack the IBUs and
how many hops can I get into this beer, and like how big and bitter can I make it?
Yeah.
And barley wine, very much kind of fit that bill for a period of time.
And this was an American barley wine base, compared to the English barley wine, which are definitely no hop profile.
Yeah.
Super malt forward.
Yeah, it's tough to a lot of time discern a difference for me from like a English barley wine and like a strong stock ale.
Yes.
There's a very small delineating difference between those, and it's hard to tell what it is a lot of the time.
It can be.
Because they're just not quite hopped to the level that Americans took it to.
Mm-hmm. You basically it's just a big red IPA at that point.
Yeah, and these always felt like I mean, barley wine to me for a lot of breweries, 10 years, 15 years ago, always felt to me like that was their Grand Cru, basically.
Yeah,
like this is an expression of what we can do as a brewery. And here you go. This is our most like big extreme beer.
Yeah.
Here's all the hops, here's all the malt, like big alcohol. Maybe we're putting it in barrels, maybe we're not, but like this is our big like love letter to beer ingredients.
Yes.
And that's why I love barley wine. And I think way more people should love barley wine than do. If you're a beer lover and you love hops and malts, and like barley wine is to me the ultimate expression of just taking that to an extreme.
Yep. And I think with the regular barley wine, unbarrel aged, I feel like I took a little weird approach to it. To a sense. I think it was all Falconer's Flight on the hop. Then on the malt bill, big amount of pale ale or pale malt. And then I threw in a shit ton of Munich.
Yeah.
And then, layered up your few grades of caramel malt, Special B in there, maybe a touch of roasted. I don't know if I even put any dark malt in there other than the darkest being Special B and like maybe C120.
Well, you guys are on a direct fired system, so you can kind of drive that caramelization.
And I don't know if I did any caramelization on it either. I'd have to look back at those notes. It's a couple years.
Yeah.
You forget shit.
You forget things when you're drinking beer over a couple of years.
Yeah. And then I fermented it with a Kvik yeast. And I think that's what really drove a lot of the fruity character in it.
Yeah.
Like a lot of cherry coming out of it.
How wild was that fermentation with all that sugar and Kvik yeast?
I mean, I've kind of enjoyed using Kvik yeast. I do use it on a lot of shit. Just I think it does promote a very unique profile, especially when you got malt-driven beers.
Yeah.
That one also had a shit ton of Falconer's Flight.
Yeah.
But doing on malt-forward beers, I think you can really pull out some interesting, fermentation characters.
And if people don't know what Kvik yeast is, that's the Norwegian.
Norwegian.
Yeah,
strain that just
there's several strains of Norwegian yeast that are just like super fast fermenting.
Yeah, and again, a beer that's
very aggressive,
10.7%. I think I fermented at like 95 degrees.
Yeah,
and had no fusel, no burn,
right?
No high alcohol.
You can kind of let it free rise and not worry about temperature as much.
Yeah,
and it will ferment a beer out like this in what, like 4 or 5 days?
It didn't take much more than over a week.
Yeah.
Some of them tend to really slow down at the end. Their high krausen and peak fermentation is fucking insane. I mean, it's throwing water out of the bubble bucket.
Yeah, I mean, it's just blowing out of there.
It's literally throwing water out of there. Yeah,
it's strong.
And it's also fun to watch. I mean, especially, if you graph fermentations as you're taking readings, it's really fun to see just that plummet drop. And then you see things taper off. I mean, it doesn't take long for the yeast to clean itself up either. I've had some fermentations with Kvik that it takes just as long to to finish those last couple degree Play-Doh or a couple points that it does to like chew up 80% of it, you know?
Yeah.
But I think the character of it is quite interesting.
Yeah, no, it's delicious. I mean, and really,
And that's one way without throwing fruit and extracts in the beer that you can, in my opinion, and what I try to do is that can help set a little uniqueness for where I'm at Brighton.
Yeah.
And what I'm trying to do with some beers there.
Sure. Do you have a particular malt or malt brand that you really enjoy using?
Just overall.
Just, I mean, yeah, overall or in these beers?
Not so much. I mean, really, I just buy everything from LD Carlson, so I'm at the mercy of what they got.
Yeah.
Muttons, Maris Otter is
like, hey,
is about
give it to me.
The best thing they have. So,
yeah.
That was a little bit of a challenge too. Not too much of a challenge, but everywhere you go, or at least in my experience brewing over a few places, is like just adapting to what's available to you. I know I have free control, but also looking at some other aspects of don't want to pay for shipping and all that stuff. LD right down the road, we can go pick it up. So I'm going to use mostly what they have. So relearning different maltsters, they say caramel 60, but it's different than,
Well, that's the thing. It's like I always have to look at...
different than crisp caramel 60.
Yeah, I'm always looking at like the color and extract because it's different between brands on what one, maltster considers their, process to turn out let's say a caramel malt, of like C60 or something like that. It's going to be vastly different between different maltsters. And so you kind of have to look out for their analytics.
Yeah.
And just plan based on that. And I find, it's probably more prevalent looking at things like, pale malt and Pilsner malts and these sorts of things, because what one maltster considers a pale malt might be 1 or 2 SRM off what another maltster considers a pale malt. And so you have to keep that in mind and really pay attention to those numbers because not only does it fluctuate annually or lot number, wise on what you're getting, but between maltsters as well.
Yeah.
And those are things you really have to pay attention to if you're shooting for consistency and trying to understand what's going on brewing those beers.
But yeah, I'm, between multiple breweries I've brewed at, I'm not looking for any consistency between the different ones, but definitely embracing like what ingredients or what maltsters I have that I'm choosing to make available to myself.
Yeah.
Just kind of where we're at as a small business and a young business as well. Just trying to pay attention to the financials and not overdo it, but find what I need and work with what I got.
Absolutely. I'm going to assume, I guess I'll assume that probably no dry hopping in this beer or the
I think there was.
double. Was there?
Now, the unbarrel aged version still has a hop character.
Yeah.
There may have been one dry hop. I'm almost positive there was one dry hop. There was a huge end of boil or whirlpool edition in it.
Absolutely.
I mean, good heavy bitterness, maybe something at like 20-minute, and then a massive whirlpool or finishing hop there in the boil. But I do believe there was one big dry hop.
All right. Are you doing any spunding with your beers, or are you mostly forced carbing?
No, I'll try to spund anything that I can. Mostly dry hop beers, no.
Right. I'm on the same page. I talked to Sean up at Acronym about this last week too, because I'm like, really, the only things I'm spunding are things that aren't being dry hopped.
I mean, it's kind of hard to spund a dry hop beer unless.
Yeah, he has a pressure dry hopping vessel where he can dry hop under pressure. And, still dry hop those beers even if he's spunding them.
with no
I
volcano.
I do not have that luxury. So,
Neither do I.
My concern is always being on a ladder and having the tank explode in my face while I'm
Which
trying
can
to drive
even happen,
up.
if you're, a lot of the IPAs or hazy beers that I do, I'm dry hopping multiple times through fermentation.
Yeah,
and that can still even happen. Like
Sure.
there's a lot of them
they hit those nucleation points.
Yeah,
And
if that beer's sitting, 8-degree Plato, might throw in 5-6 pounds.
yeah,
And sometimes I got to throw in only like 3 pounds, and that thing gets pissed off. And then I got to close it, slowly
give it
release
a minute,
pressure,
yeah.
let it calm down a minute, and then I can dump the remaining in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm doing spunding. Usually, I don't have, the actual spunding device. What the fuck are those things called?
Spunding valve?
Spunding valve, I guess, yeah. Sure.
Right behind you there, bud.
I do have one. I've just never thrown it on. Just because usually, I'm graphing fermentations, checking fermentations every day.
Right.
So usually I'm, a degree Plato, a couple degrees Plato away from anticipated terminal gravity.
Yeah.
And I just close my tank off.
Yep.
And then daily, then I check the pressure gauge, and I got, my classic blue painter's tape, mark the needle.
Yep.
That's one of my
Throw it
favorite.
right on
That's
there.
one of my favorite things of like walking into the brewery every morning. Is like checking the gauges and then moving that tape.
Mm-hmm.
Do the same thing if after that beer is chilled down, leave it under pressure. 5, 6, 7 days. CO2 set for 15 psi. After that, take CO2 off, mark that tape, see where it drops down to.
Yeah.
Since I don't have a CO2 volume reading device,
No time.
So I'm doing this by just
Taste and
time,
feel. Yeah.
time and temperature and pressure.
Yeah.
And just understanding what that chart, the CO2 volume chart, means.
Yeah.
And I think that is one thing also learning from an old school brewer who understood that, instilled that understanding into me.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of young brewers I've talked to over my career that like don't even get time, temperature, pressure. They don't get it.
It's kind of a,
So they may have a Zominator, but they're like, I don't even know how to read it.
Yeah, they don't understand what any of it means.
Yeah.
And that's, one of those things where while proliferation of craft breweries is great, and we want to see more and more craft breweries, there's a lot of technical know-how that gets lost sometimes. And that's, I'm sure you were this way, I'm this way. When I got into unfamiliar territory out here and, brought in the big equipment, I didn't jump into this blindfolded like I knew what the hell I was doing, because I didn't. And it was talking to a lot of other brewers, going and doing brew days at a lot of other breweries, and like getting my feet wet. And understanding kind of how this equipment worked at scale that I hadn't been at before, and getting an idea. And that's the thing, is like, not only just spending a shitload of time researching things on tons of forums and things on the internet, but talking to larger scale breweries. And, just getting an understanding of a lot of what I was doing that I didn't really have experience in. And, taking that advice where, I hope that the people younger than us are doing the same thing. Getting that advice, getting good advice, taking that advice, not thinking that I know better than everyone, because I feel like that's a problem too. There's a lot of confidence without a lot of know-how sometimes. And I hope that people kind of start to understand that there's a lot of value in
any
experience.
Any dum-dum can drive a car. All you got to do is turn the key.
Right. Yeah. And that's, I don't know. I hope we're getting to a point now, because there's a large amount of breweries and brewing places that are opening across the country, where I think we're starting to see a little bit of it. There's a bit of a washout of, maybe some people that didn't quite
the reckoning.
Yeah, didn't quite get on board with the experience and know-how portion of the business.
Yeah,
Where that counts for a lot if you're going to be in it for the long haul.
it does.
You can have a good idea, but if you don't know how to execute it properly, that's very problematic.
It can be, and it just may remain an idea.
Yeah. So we're going to kind of get past the technical portion of the podcast now. We're going to go to a few more fun questions. Do you have a hobby currently outside of craft brewing that you care about? I think I know the answer to this from your expression on your face. But I got to ask it anyways.
I wish I really did, but starting a small brewery 3 years ago has taken a lot of my life.
Sure, yeah.
For good and
a lot of time and effort in that.
Good reasons. I have found myself going back to the woods and more walking again.
Yeah, getting out in nature.
Yep. So I have been doing, I live in Summit County. Fantastic park systems, whether it be Summit County Metro Parks or, the National Forest down in the Peninsula Valley.
Yeah.
I'm so blessed. And as I hope anybody else that lives in that area is also blessed to have that at their fingertips. So I'm doing a lot of 8, 10, 12-mile hikes.
Yeah.
And I'm moving. Like, I'm looking at a lot of my stats on my phone. Like, I'm got like a 34-inch stride. Doing 10 miles in 2.5, 3 hours.
Yeah.
And I've got a couple good loops. A lot of them just start off the towpath, kind of, and I can do other branching trails off to that. So that's kind of been my hobby, and I don't care if it's at night or early in the morning.
Well,
sometimes the night hikes are the best because really nobody's out,
right?
And then you get a little different wildlife.
Yeah.
I mean, anybody else living in Summit County and definitely in the greater Akron area, coyotes are going crazy. And I've had a couple encounters with coyotes. Nothing bad or dangerous. I was like,
right, yeah.
There's 10 coyote,
yeah. Those are, I will always describe coyote howls and screams as some of the creepiest thing you can hear.
Extremely creepy.
And it's always fun. So I still, guy I was in the military with, I go hunting with him every year down in West Virginia. And, we're out in the wilderness. I love it. And it's a moment of centering. Even if I don't see a deer or whatever, the whole time I'm down, I don't give a shit. Because it's I'm in the woods. It's like a centering thing where you're in nature. The birds are out there. This, squirrels, as annoying as they are when you're trying to listen for deer walking in on you or anything else. It's nice to just be out in the woods and observe, nature for what it is.
Where everything could actually revert back to.
And it's always funny because, if I do get something, if I know, it's funny, that night after the first day of hunting season, hearing the coyotes get on gut piles and everything else from people being out hunting because it's a national holiday down there. Kids are off school for 2 weeks when hunting season starts in West Virginia.
It's a different culture,
So it's it's crazy because everybody's out in the woods, and then you wait till nightfall, and me and my buddy stand outside of his house, and you can just hear in the dark of night just coyotes getting on stuff, and it's one of the most creepy sounds, but at the same time, it's this is nature's cleanup crew coming to take care of these problems.
Yep.
And it's wild.
So that seeing owls, God, the amount of deer that just don't give a shit that you're right there.
Yeah.
I mean, they'll practically walk up to you.
Right. They're so used to people walking through the forest.
And so now we're
parks,
coming up into about a week or so away, if not here right on top of us, mushroom hunting season.
Yeah, morels.
So we got morels.
Yeah.
Also, got the oysters. You got others coming up around.
Yeah, and then ramps too are coming.
Ramps are coming up. Those are right around the same time as morels.
Yeah.
That and then just the amount of wildlife. And I was talking with my sister about this just last night. And I was sitting in her backyard with her, And, we were talking about, as we were kids, not seeing as many birds or even red-tailed hawks or turkey vulture. But she's like, also, all these trees, it wasn't as developed. Like, just the trees in general in our neighborhoods, and those birds aren't going to be there if they don't have trees to live in.
Yeah.
So then, turkey vultures aren't coming in, hawks aren't coming in, owls aren't coming in. The deer are starting to come up out of the valley, and they're doing a lot of construction in Summit County and definitely in my area of West Akron, Northwest Akron, that redoing the sewers. So that's taking a lot of wildlife probably up into the neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Especially the deer at that point. Even coyote, seen some coyote just walking sidewalks.
Sure, yeah.
But the amount of red-tailed hawks and eagles that I've been seeing down there. And I know where some of the nests are in the Peninsula Valley. So it's, I can easily find those, know where they're at, walk up on them. But it's also great.
Okay, so we got a little bit cut off on the last segment there. We'll pick right back up. We're having a third beer because we're degenerates and we like to. This is your black lager.
Yeah, smoked black lager.
This is the Duke.
Duke. So this is named after my old dog, Duke.
I also had a dog named Duke.
He was a fantastic dog. I don't know if you ever met him, but I used to take him everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, he was a dog that, I leashed him, but really didn't need to leash. And oftentimes, if we were by ourselves, didn't. He was a dog that you could look at the eyes and you could communicate that way.
Yeah.
Snap finger, he knew what that meant.
Yeah, knew exactly. What kind of dog was it?
He was of the bully breed.
Yeah.
Probably like an American Staffordshire Terrier. A little taller, a little more slender, but maxed out in his prime days at like 115 pounds.
Yeah.
And he scared the shit out of people walking around in like West Akron.
That's we've been rescuing cane corsos the past couple of years, and we had our boy who passed away last year. That was the first one we had, and he was a terrific dog. But also, if you were unfamiliar and you saw him walking down the street with us, it was like a terrifying sight.
Very intimidating.
Yeah, and
the dog was a sweetheart.
Yeah, and that's your own dog and how they are with you. But at the same time, like I always sort of enjoyed the fact that he was a little intimidating. Like, you get this breed a bit for a security system a little bit, but also like super lovable.
Yeah.
Like loved the family, loved hanging out, loved his big 130-pound ass getting up on the couch and hanging out, taking up most of it.
Yep.
So, and we have our girl now that we adopted like 3 years ago now. Right during the pandemic, we got her. But she's a bit more of a goofball, like still like she's crazy because she doesn't like other people she doesn't know, or definitely not other animals. And so we have to be pretty careful with, she goes in our yard basically, and that's it.
Yep.
Doesn't like walking because she's too amped up.
Yeah.
We walk her down the street and she's like trying to chase cars, trying to chase people, everything else. And I'm like, all right, well, I'm not going to take you for a walk around the block.
You're not a social dog.
You don't like other people or things, so we keep you pretty close to home.
I kind of gotten this dog kind of right at almost like the beginning of my brewing career. And then I had to put him down in 2020, kind of as like Brighten was kind of coming about. So that dog was here for my entire brewing career. And I only thought it appropriate to name a smoked black lager after him.
Beautiful tribute.
Yeah, so there is a picture of him hanging at the brewery. You'll know it's the only dog picture in there.
Yeah.
Handsome boy.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to move along to our last question. Lemmy sort of, from Motorhead, said the famous, quote, they were asking him about what he was bringing to heavy music, and he said, hey, we're bringing nothing to heavy music. We're bringing, we're only taking things away. We took away pretentious musicianship, outlandish outfits, and what we were bringing was real and true. What do you think that you're bringing to brewing that is real and true, or what are you eliminating, kind of from that gauntlet of things.
Yeah, so it's kind of not. I don't think I'm really bringing anything or eliminating anything. It's more of holding on to what beer is, and what beer was before where we're at right now currently in the industry. Before we got cut off, I made the point of before the macro breweries came in, there was no such thing as craft beer. Just beer styles existed.
Yeah.
So craft beer really isn't a thing. It's only a made up thing.
Yeah. And I don't know, maybe it's not that, craft beer is a thing in America, I guess, is embracing things other than
the regions and historics behind all of these different beer styles.
Yeah, and I think it's bringing something in outside of the American light lager style, which was, and still is ubiquitous in this country, where, that's kind of the association we have with beer. And I think craft beer kind of came along and changed people in this country's perspective on what beer is and could be.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's, I feel like we're probably very similar in that aspect.
Yeah.
Where craft beer as a title is basically in this country anything outside of that American light lager.
Basically, and that's a little disappointing.
Yeah.
But also, it's great that there is such a broad line between the two.
Yeah. Well, I think it gives us an opportunity as well, where you're in a country that was, up until let's say 30 years ago, was singularly known as a country producing commodity beer,
mm-hmm.
where the craft movement here is not so much as where brewing has been in many other countries for centuries, but we're kind of bringing that into this country and making it our own. And that's, I think that's still an exciting thing, where you can introduce people to new beer styles, new styles of brewing,
mm-hmm.
and just get people to understand that beer can be this very, wide net of options,
mm-hmm.
that didn't previously exist here.
Yep.
And I think it's a fantastic thing. Tom, thank you so much for being here today. Thanks for coming and doing the podcast. I really appreciate it. I know that it's tough to get out a lot of the time. I struggle. That's part of my motivation for this podcast, is because I've been so lazy about going to other breweries and tasting other people's beers for the past several years, where it was tough to get around. And I think, like a lot of people, I kind of fell in that funk where
you got used to just
being at home.
Yep.
Yeah. And that's, so this is giving me motivation to go out and visit others again and try other people's beer and see what everybody's doing. And I hope that it motivates others similarly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no sense in sitting at home wasting yourself away.
Yeah.
Get out and be productive. Go see somebody. Go talk to people.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So, hey, cheers, Tom.
Cheers,
really
Jake.
Appreciate you coming down today.
Absolutely,
and
man.
It's been super fun. Thank you so much.
Blessed to be here.
Yeah, cheers, brother.